everyone, JPals here. Over the last couple months, I hosted a giant double elimination tournament of 75 different Pokemon games. The bracket was mostly run for determining the song ratios for the second edition of the Ultimate Pokemon playlist. Before the first one was even in the editing bay. Oops. But also, just to see how everyone felt about each game. The fun thing about Pokemon is that there's so many different avenues you can take these little critters down that we've known for decades, be it the standard RPG or spamming the one button over and over again after using 1500 Wii points for Pokemon Rumble. Today, we're going to be going through the results and seeing just which game came out on top while offering up my own opinions along the way. Question is, in what order? Since 75 games were used, and the matches were just 1v1s, there are some games that inevitably had more matches to get through than others. What I'll be doing is splitting the difference. I'll follow the bracket in elimination order, sorted by voting percentage, aka how many votes the game received of the total votes that were cast in its matches, but notate where the game fell out on pure percentage as well without the elimination structure. I'll also offer up 3 different disclaimers at this time. The bracket was ran between August and November 2024, and as my channel isn't exactly big, pretty much every matchup received less than 20 votes, so some of these results might be a little skewed. Finally, it should go without saying, but this is a reporting of tournament results and not my own personal ranking. Trust me though, you'll hear plenty of my thoughts on these games as we go, with a bunch of stats to break down at the very end. Did your favorite Pokemon game come out on top? Only one way to find out. Before we start though, if I can ask you guys to leave a like and subscribe, that would be really appreciated. Leave a funny little comment about your thoughts on the bracket results as well. I'd love to see your opinions on these games. After this video goes up, I'll be making quick little 60-second shorts about the games featured here as well, one a day. Alright, enough pre-ramble. Let's get into it. Scraping in at the bottom of the barrel in 75th place is Pokemon Channel. I don't think any of us can really be shocked by this result. Some people don't even consider this one a proper game, and while I don't exactly agree with that notion, there's no way it was catching any win against Guardian Signs of the loser bracket, or especially Black and White in its very first matchup. Pokemon Channel, for those who did not have a GameCube in their childhood, is a very quaint game in today's landscape of iPads. Set in front of a CRT for most of the game, you and your friend Pikachu are tasked by Professor Oak to watch a bunch of different programs in order to collect data on the viewing habits of Pokemon. I find the channels themselves to be quite adorable, from a quiz channel hosted by Wobbuffet to an aerobics class ran by Smoochum to the entire Pichu Bros animated short. There's even a little Mareep counting channel for those that need an 8-hour video counting sheep to fall asleep to. Hey, wait a minute, where did that video come from? Might be worth a watch after this. There's little moments to escape from the TV as well, to visit a forest and beach among other locales, much like Hey You Pikachu before it. So at the very least, it's not all just staring at Slowpoke take 372 years to tell me it's cloudy outside. That said, in the context of this bracket though, no way in hell it was going to make it past the very first set of eliminations. Next up in 74th would be TCG Online, which was a browser-based trading card game experience that ran from generations 5 through 8, eventually being replaced by TCG Live. I remember dabbling in a couple games out of curiosity on the program when I was still in high school, but I've never been much of a TCG player, unfortunately. From what I've been able to gather, votes seemed like a pretty solid time, so hey, that's good at least. Bracket-wise, I wasn't expecting the TCG games to do anything, but Online didn't exactly have the best odds even with that bleak outcome. Its very first match was against Platinum, which, yeah, good luck, followed by Poke Park 2 in the losers bracket, against which it was able to get 2 votes. I'm not super into Poke Park either, but given that was a proper console release, it was very easy to see that this game's time was up by the time the first losers bracket matches settled in. This game here is where you'll start to see the percentage placements differ from the bracket results, as there was a game knocked down in the second round of losers bracket that did worse than TCG Online by a tiny bit. I won't be calling attention to the occurrence unless the difference is staggering moving forward, so just something to keep in mind. Moving right along with our only pure Wii U entry on the list, in 73rd place is Rumble U. I never touched the Rumble series after the original WiiWare title, but I did at least know of this one's existence, thanks to the little amiibo things before amiibo were a thing. As such, I can't really speak much on the game here. Bracket-wise, this thing was smoked. going against Yellow in its very first matchup, followed by the original Rumble in the losers bracket. It caught 2 votes against Rumble, so that's at least something, but as someone completely unfamiliar with Rumble outside of the 1 or 2 button spamming of WiiWare days, I have virtually nothing to say of substance for the entire Rumble series. So instead of trying to play a facade to try to sound knowledgeable on all things as they were and will be, I'll just simply move on to our next game. Cool. Oh, god damn it, it's another Rumble game. 72nd place has us looking at Rumble World, and yeah, that is a Rumble alright. How this series has a whole 5 games to its name is beyond me, but hey, it's okay. I recognize I'm not the target audience. Rumble World was able to collect a total of 5 votes across its 2 matchups, but when you're up against both XD and Detective Pikachu, the prognosis of a good time isn't exactly high. Again, not going to fake having knowledge when I just don't really care about the side series, especially since those that voted didn't seem to have much of a matter of interest for either matchup, so we'll just keep moving along. Cool. Ah, here's one I know. In 71st place, we have Mystery Dungeon Gates to Infinity. Definitely the black sheep when it comes to the Mystery Dungeon series. At the very least, as always, the music is excellent, but the everything else is lacking. To boot, the thing was up against both Conquest and Oraz, so yeah, Gates was going to sink like a ton of bricks. For those unfamiliar with Gates, wondering why no one seems to like this darn thing, let me put it to you like this. In the first 2 games, Mystery Dungeon had a very simple structure for you to follow for dozens and dozens of hours of gameplay. Wake up, go to the town square for item inventory work, pick out jobs, then set off on an adventure to complete those. Earn explorer points, and get some nice, juicy rewards. Maybe even a rare recruit along the way if you're lucky. Gates, however, decided to hone in on one very specific area that you usually spend 0.5 seconds in the first 2 games for every day cycle, the home base. Nothing against Sharpedo Bluff or the Starter Huts and Red and Blue Rescue Team, but they were nice little visual set pieces that let you save. Not really much more. The rewards as well have also been stripped back significantly, mostly aiming for resources that you can use on the home base, which Gates calls Paradise. As for the story, especially coming off the heels of Time, Darkness, and Sky, there was definitely a degradation. Instead of the likes of proving your purpose in an unfamiliar world or going through an escapade through time-space, Gates opts for a much simpler tale of trust headed up by Muna? I don't know. I'm sorry, I don't care how many Pokemon this thing may have wiped out. You're not going to be able to convince me that the sleepy little floating oval is this all-powerful big bad that I'm supposed to be like, ooh, scary around. Outside of a story though, the personality quiz is gone, and the number of starters is drastically reduced, with a very obvious correct answer, as the game opts for mostly just for Unova decks with a few additional faces. There is also the fact that this is the first 3D title. Just a lot of firsts here that didn't quite pan out. We could save more detailed thoughts for another day though. This is a bracket discussion after all. So, let's keep on cruising. Oh hey, the actual black sheep of the Mystery Dungeon series, the WiiWare title's in 70th place. The only reason why this one did marginally better than Gates would be chalked up to much weaker competition in both Rumble Rush and Hey You Pikachu, mixed with lower voter turnout even for this tournament standards. The WiiWare titles are the only Mystery Dungeon games I haven't played, since they're Japanese exclusive and I just haven't worked up a desire to play them yet, so I can't go on a full tangent like I did for Gates to Infinity. But I can at least offer what I do know. A big point of critique against this game has to go toward the dungeons. A similar tale to Gates to Infinity, but on a larger scale, we don't really get a good sense of a world scale or where we actually are going in comparison to our starting location. The first 2 points had this map your little Pokemon moved across when you started missions, along with plot points highlighting just how far away from home you are. So there was always this sense of scale. From what I have gathered, the WiiWare titles don't really do that, just giving you dungeons that don't really feel all that different from each other, with whatever little name the developers decided to give to the cavern. The WiiWare titles came out in 3 versions, with each game only having 12 dungeons total. Not exactly the most to work through, is it? But hey, it's okay, the game isn't legally accessible anymore, it can't hurt us. In 69th, we have what at least feels like a recent addition of the series for me, Pokemon Quest. I think I had interest for all of 2 minutes when this game was originally announced, but then I decided that I had much better things to do with my time, so I left it alone. From what I've been able to gather, it's a dungeon exploration game, but unlike Mystery Dungeon, you just kind of drop off and go. Mix between Mystery Dungeon and Rumble, I think? Doesn't seem like there's a lot of substance to this one either, but hey, if I'm wrong about this one or any other games I don't have much clue on, feel free to inform me politely in the comments. As for the bracket, it ended up flopping hard against Super Mystery Dungeon and actually put up a decent fight against TCG Live, but to no avail. As such, it received that round 1 banishment. Next is a game I haven't even heard of before I started making the bracket, Pokemon Duel in 68th place. This one was a mobile app title that didn't even see the 4-year mark, most likely out of fear of a potential Persona 5 crossover in its near future. If you know, you know. I originally thought this game would be a simple brawl 'em up akin to a Rumble, but it seems like Duel is actually a board game based on the Pokemon trading figure game. Yes, the TFG. Something I haven't even heard of until doing some very minor research into this entry. Not like I needed to do much though, the plot was unfinished before the game shut down from what I'm able to see on Bulbapedia, so hey, if they're not going to rush out an ending, why should I put forward 2,641 thoughts on a game I didn't even know existed? As for the bracket, Duel got slapped pretty easily by Rescue Team DX, no one's surprised, but actually got pretty close to escaping a first round L, coming up just shy against Shuffle. Battle Revolution is our next title in 67th place, and this one I at least have a better grasp on. To explain to those that haven't seen this title outside of False Swipe gaming footage, it's the final game in a loose lineage of console games where you could have your Pokemon battles on the TV, which began with Pokemon Stadium. Coliseum XD spice things up in a big way by providing a whole story alongside Pikachu using Thunderbolt, but in 3D. But that story element is unfortunately not seen with their follow-up Battle Revolution. 2 things I will give this game credit for. The animation work is fantastic, and this was the first game from the Nintendo Wii to have online functionality, so hey, good job, Genius Seniority. Sonority? I don't know what I said the first time. That lack of plot after Coliseum and XD really hurt this game from the jump though, and is reflected in our tournament results as well. Battle Revolution got dangerously close to beating Pinball Ruby and Sapphire, but started off by falling apart against Crystal. There are definitely spin-offs that can go toe-to-toe against some main lines and even beat the weaker entries, but Battle Revolution is absolutely not one of them. But hey, at least it's not some obscure mobile app that got unplugged decently fast. We have 2 games left to cover in our first round of losers, so next up in 66th, we have Battletrose. Yet another title I have no clue about. God damn it. Good thing is that I don't really need that much info, since the Batrose games are just match 'em ups meant to kill a solid hour at the airport, or on a car ride while your aunt blabbers on and on about some workplace drama. There's just not much to say about this title after even looking it up, and while losing against new Pokemon Snap makes sense, it also lost against Dream Radar. You know, the thing that you could have used to get Landorus Varian? Not really much to say about the game or the matchups. So in the interest of me not sounding like Rudy from the Final 5 Immunity Challenge of Survivor Borneo, allow me to move to our final Round 1 entry. In 65th place, finishing out our first set of losers, we have Stadium 1. Against any other series, Stadium 1 most likely would have lasted quite a while in the bracket, but unfortunately, it ended up going against Mystery Dungeon, Explorers of Sky and Red Blue Rescue Team to be precise. In both matchups, it did get incredibly close, losing to Sky by 1 vote and Red and Blue Rescue Team by 2, but it just couldn't get going, unfortunately. As I said in the Battle Revolution segment, Stadium is by and large a battle simulator, but it does have 2 things going on that make it stand out on its own. The Gym Leader Castle, so you can make yourself ask why Brock has a Ninetales in the second go around, as well as a fun assortment of minigames that still slap to this day. There's also a large assortment of cups that you can play to give yourself a bunch of different challenges, and also a whole rental system that has its own metagame of what rocks and what sucks. I'd probably check out the likes of Big Yellow Stadium content for more in regards to that. Stadium 1, being the highest scoring round 1 game percentage-wise by a 10-point margin, was able to soar all the way up to 39th place when going by percentage, leapfrogging a few of the mainline titles in this regard. Not bad for a little battle sim. This whole discussion video is going to be a big ol' blur if I don't break it up between large segments like that, so let me use this first break to let you guys know that I have a bunch of videos on the way, especially now that I have a work laptop. In the works are a couple Pokemon playlists, 3 more playlists for a mystery series, a discussional video for the Fire Emblem bracket that we ran right before this Pokemon one, and a load of shorts where we'll be talking a little more about the games in the bracket among many other things. Playlists are my bread and butter as I'm a pretty big music guy, so if you like funky tunes, please subscribe. I'm usually not one for goal setting, but by the end of 2025, I want to see if I can get anywhere close to 5,000 subscribers. Maybe we can hit that together, we'll see. Now, back to your regularly scheduled program. To kick off round 2 in 64th place and the second worst scoring game by percentage, we have Art Academy. Art Academy was a doomed game from the jump, getting its sole vote against Diamond and Pearl after getting completely washed by XD. The title is a bunch of art lessons, and speaking as someone who cannot draw for crap, allow me to give a shout out to all of the artists who have worked in this channel past and present. In particular, Permello, who made that sick ass intro and has made a slew of this channel's more recent thumbnails, including this lovely little one for an upcoming video, Stardust Road, who has made a few thumbnails as well, but more so does the artwork for the playlist videos, and the artist who did this video's thumbnail coming from the Reality Resort crew. Well, thank all 3 of you for your contributions over the years. Here's to doing much more together in the future. In 63rd place is a game that I've always known about but haven't seen in action at any point. TCG2, The Invasion of Team GR. Before we talk about this game, let's just get the bracket results out of the way. Of course this thing was failing against Crystal and New Pokemon Snap. Like, no doy, it's a Japanese exclusive title. Anywho, from what I could tell, TCG2 is basically the same as the original Game Boy Color game, but with the addition of an evil team in the mix and a playable female protagonist. Interesting enough though, and to repeat myself, this game never came out in the States. Only ever seen a Japanese release. I would most likely contribute that to the fact that TCG2 came out a week after the Game Boy Advance came out in Japan. Late stage releases can definitely stand out in one way or another, such as Phrasia 776 or Persona Q2, but more often than not, it's just better to focus your efforts on the new thing that's just about to drop. It's definitely not a sales thing. As per the VG Sales Wiki, which has additional sourcing, TCG1 sold well over 3.5 million copies, so the market was absolutely there. Oh well, at least there's little translation packs out there so people can give this one a fair shake. Pokepark 1 comes next in our rankings here in 62nd place, and this is another one that got absolutely clobbered by its matchups. It ended up picking up 1 vote against both Scarlet and Violet and Ruby and Sapphire, but like, there was no way in hell this one was succeeding in any way. Right? It was a cute little novelty game when it first dropped, running around as a Pikachu making friends, chasing after Mew like Pokemon Snap all over again. Creatures Inc. calling out the weirdness of some learn sets like Primate being able to use Iron Tail, but against pretty much every mainline and a good number of the spin-offs, it just was not going to last. Watching the legendary Pokemon absolutely obliterate some of the minigames, like Mew in one of the racing minigames, is incredibly funny though, so hey, that's at least something. Would y'all even want a Pokepark 3 in the modern day? I feel like it's a little hard for a series like this to stand out, especially when you have 2 juggernauts that focus heavily on their minigames, Mario Party and WarioWare, hitting a nice stride with their Switch titles, but maybe there's something I'm not seeing. Let me know. Let's talk about it. Up next in 61st is Dreamworld, an experience that most definitely benefited from semi-low turnout for both of its matches. Dreamworld, which is now long extinct, provided Generation 5 with 2 key factors, being able to grow berries and being able to obtain Pokemon with hidden abilities long before the system got worked into the games proper. Hidden abilities are an absolute game changer for some, allowing the likes of Dragonite to really shine thanks to multi-scale. In Generation 5 in particular, a big fear that I would have loved to see to come to fruition was the existence of Shadow Tag Chandelure. Unfortunately though, such did not come to pass. Back Back to Dreamworld though, the site closed its operations about 2 months after the release of X and Y, leaving behind a trail of memories for those that had popped onto the sites as their Pokemon slumbered. It wasn't a deep experience, but it was a pretty chill one for those that were able to use it. One positive though? The art style for some of its artwork, which was used prior by the likes of Pokemon Channel, can still be seen in the present day. So, hey, not all's lost. The next game is one that I'd call capital S Shafted. It was a title I thought would have done a lot better due to the love the Nintendo 64 Pokemon games generally get. Puzzle League, clocking in at 60th place. Have I ever played Puzzle League? Nope, sorry. But I do know other panel de pong games and similar tile, rise, and match games from elsewhere, so I know the game slapped, especially mixed with the anime aesthetics of those early years. Puzzle League had the unfortunate bracket setup of going against both Pokemon Snap and ORAS, meaning it wasn't going to be going anywhere anytime fast. Only receiving 3 of a possible 21 votes meant Puzzle League was going to be sinking a bit in both metrics too. So there's no silver lining like there was with Stadium 1. Since I never played it and gameplay isn't that deep, not really much more for me to say. So to the next game we glide, or rather jump. Magikarp Jump, a little game that I forgot existed that my friend Eon Igus has been grinding like crazy lately. Going against Arceus and Sun and Moon, I don't think anyone expected Magikarp Jump to do too hot, which ended up being the case. 59th ain't bad for a game like that though. Another one in the, I don't know, department. Given a quick scroll to Bulbapedia, there seems to be way more going on than I would have imagined thanks to some different cups, a whole bunch of random events, and a lot more Pokemon evolved than just Magikarp in the Make Magikarp Jump High game. The art style is also really cozy as well, reminding me of the stickers that you'd find in craft stores to depict your family in a scrapbook. The different patterns are also really cute too, with my favorite probably being either the pink two-tone or the gray patches. It's a type of variation that I wish we'd see in the modern Pokemon games. Not necessarily to Magikarp's degree, but more so having a couple different variations to the Pokemon's design. For example, if Glameow's tail went in a zigzag instead to emulate Tom from Tom and Jerry when he gets hit by something, or both ears being full length on Baneri. Little things like that. For now though, just a cute little mobile game that beat Puzzle League by being in matchups with less votes. Gotta love it. The original TCG game for Game Boy Color is up next in 58th, getting absolutely swatted by Emerald in the bracket before coming up just short of the original Pokemon Ranger. Of all the TCG experiences, this is the one I've played the most thanks to some now useless recordings I was doing for a big Pokemon retrospective that I promise to do one day, eventually. Trademark. Copyright. From what I remember, pretty cozy time. The game was nothing too difficult once you got the rhythm of the systems, which the game does a pretty good job in teaching you on. The game itself isn't anything crazy, basically just emulating Red and Blue's League system, but now you can have Zapdos as a trading card instead of wondering if the entire city will shut down after it flaps its wings once inside the gym. Crazy, I know. Game of Pokemon was white hot at the time, and trading cards were pretty popular as well. This game selling like hotcakes should come as a surprise to absolutely no one. Just a shame we never got the follow-up in the West, but hey, that's how things go sometimes. In 57th, yet another one I haven't played, Cafe Remix. Once we get out of this pit at the bottom, I promise I'll have a lot more to say, but for right now, we're just going to truck through. This is another one of those match the symbols together games like Troze, Puzzle League, or Candy Crush, but this time we're in a cafe. Ooh. I will say above all else though, the art style is absolutely adorable, looking at it from an outside lens. All the Pokemon look really sweet and eager in their little worker outfits, ready to get a Karen her venti frappuccino with 6 shots of espresso, 3 pumps of vanilla, 4 pumps of brown sugar, 16 pumps of caramel, extra 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 caramel drizzle, all double blended and made blonde at 6:12 a.m. with a smile on their face. Almost all of them. Oshawott here would probably take a 45-minute grind break as it should, while Gotharita here would take 27 minutes to make the drink only to throw it in her face, as she should. This is what Genius Sonority has been up to these days though, and while I'd prefer if it got back to the likes of Coliseum or XD, the original version of Cafe Remix titled Cafe Mix, of course, was nominated at the Game Awards in 2020 for Best Mobile Game, so I don't think these breaks are getting pumped anytime soon. That caramel though, absolutely 0 questions. And another 27 pumps while you're at it. I'm going to try to rattle through these next two really quick, just because they're far less interesting to me than Cafe Remix, and they're from the exact same style of game. But match them up. These two titles in 56th and 55th would be Shuffle and Troze. So instead of 45 seconds of me just going, like I'm Patrick placing an order at Krusty Krab, allow me to just go over their matches really quick. Shuffle is an actually interesting one to discuss this early, as it's the first game we're talking about that won against another game. Then again, that game was dual and a 5-4 vote to boot, so is it really all that interesting? It earned its other 4 votes against Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, and Detective Pikachu Returns, while being absolutely dog-walked in both matches, leaving it with a pretty low percentage despite a win. The original Troze flopped against Unite and Pokepark 2. Not exactly stellar titles, but very clear 0% odds of victory if you're just asking for my opinion here. Dream Radar is up next at number 54, and being so real, before I did any research, I thought this was a small little 3DS eShop application that you'd use to get the reveal glass for the Genie Trio in Gen 5, but no. Turns out there's actually a pretty in-depth system here at play once again, complete with a bunch of Pokemon you can capture that have their hidden abilities. Most importantly, Igglybuff. Obviously. You can also use a Gen 4 game in a slight homage to the dual slot system Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum were rocking in your 3DS, to get the Creation Trio as well as Ho and Lugia, so that's pretty cool. Nothing groundbreaking obviously, but one that worked with the system it released on and actually brought us Professor Bernay, who later appeared in the Generation 7 titles. As for the bracket, it did pick up a win against Battle Troze, but then flamed out hard against both Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon and Pinball Ruby and Sapphire in quick succession. Feel like that's a no-duh moment, but the game Bernay was introduced in, going up and losing against a game Bernay was included in, kinda funny, not gonna lie. This one's probably a little higher up than some of you expected, but it's Hey You Pikachu in 53rd. A precursor to Pokemon Channel, this one used a microphone peripheral where you could talk directly to Pikachu and say things like catch, or hi, or fuck. It's a simple little game offering a simple little time with a simple little task of just helping Oak test another piece of machinery. Hey You Pikachu is definitely meant for a younger audience, and for its audience of toddlers and young children, the game does exactly what it needs to do. For those that have played or seen Channel, it's basically the same as Song and Dance, except now you can use Pikachu for a free therapy session if you so desire, instead of just gambling your problems away via the Odd One Out channel. It did pick up a win in a 5-vote matchup against the WiiWare Mystery Dungeon titles as a collective unit, and barely lost against Puzzle Challenge. But starting off by taking a 16-3 L against Shadows of Almia made sure Hey You Pikachu was going to be scoring relatively low. Up next is Pokken Tournament DX in 52nd, and much like Puzzle League, I thought this thing would have made it further, this time because it was a Wii U turned Switch title and a fighting game to boot. However, Pokken ended up suffering the same fate as Stadium 1, where it got stuck against 2 mystery dungeons back to back. Or game? Kind of? What I'm trying to say is it lost in a close match to Rescue Team DX, then got smoked by Red and Blue Rescue Team, which Rescue Team DX was a remake of. As for Pokken itself, I gave it a solid go in that recording marathon I mentioned in TCG1. I'm not great at fighting games one bit, but I did have a solid amount of fun using Decidueye and landing some combos against the computer players. What I did pick up on was that Pokken Tournament DX is exactly what the title says it is. A Tekken game, starring Pokemon, and an enhanced version of the original iteration like so many fighting games before it. There's a great system under the hood, so if you're into fighting games and haven't tried out Pokken, check it out. Per Event Hubs, it's a game where Sceptile is incredibly goated, tying for the top score with Aegislash and barely better than Lucario. We all need some more Sceptile love in our lives anyway. Swampert and Blaziken have gotten plenty, I say, as someone who always picks Mudkip. Oops. Pokemon Sleep snoozes its way up to 51st, the second newest title to be included in the bracket, being beat out by Detective Pikachu Returns by a couple of months. I had this game for a couple of days, but deleted it after I connected some mental dots. On one hand, something that tracks your sleep and tells you details so you can try to improve your sleeping habits? Sure. On the other hand, it records the sounds you're making, gamifies the process, with experience being tied to how long you sleep plus the quality of sleep, and has a shiny hunting element. That feels a little gross. And if you disagree with me, that's fine. I just think it's all a little odd. There's also the fact that you can just fake a nap by leaving your phone in an empty bedroom for a couple hours and then come back, so not doing too many favors there. Bracket-wise, it beat TCG Live before getting quietly swept out by Pokemon Go, and a game I expected to pick up a total 0 wins in the bracket. Picross. Let sleep dream another dream. I guess. Just 2 more to go for the round 2 losers. Coming in at 50th, we have yet another Rumble title, this time the original Pokemon Rumble. This one I did play a fair bit when it first came out, so I can at least speak on it a little bit more. For what it was as a WiiWare title and looking back, there's definitely a concept there, but it felt half-baked. For a beat-em-up style game that Rumble is, it gets very repetitive very fast, as most games in that genre do. Does the tournament system help, as well as different levels? Sure, I guess. But as you proceed in the cups, it's just the same 6 layouts again and again and again and again and again with increasingly stronger Pokemon. For Pokemon having traits and the ability to be shiny with moveset variation, that's genuinely nice. I like that. Because otherwise it's just hitting the same note over and over and over and over and over again, like a toddler who's spamming G sharp on a piano 57 times. I'd have probably made the simple decision to alter the layouts of the dungeon each time or have randomized elements, while also including power-ups along the way. Stuff like the vitamins from the mainline games, for instance, or a sort of boosting energy drop that lets your attack come out twice as fast, or activate twice. Something like that. As Rumble stands though, simple, just undercooked. As far as matchups go, it did fall against Rumble Blast and beat Rumble U, but then got smoked by Shadows of Volmia, leaving it here in 50th. The last loser of a second round in 49th place is a personal favorite of mine, Detective Pikachu. I'm a sucker for both a good detective game as well as Kaiji Tane's voice work for Owain/Odin in Fire Emblem, so seeing a nice simple detective game that kids can pick up on while having an electric VA behind the mic for a rather bossy Pikachu is nice to see. There's also the matter of Tim Goodman's design, and I must say Tim's look as a Christopher Robin type is a lot better than whatever the hell happened to him in Returns. Whatever Pretty Stick Todd Snap got hit with for New Pokemon Snap, Tim Goodman must have gotten hit with the other end, cause yikers. Unlike a lot of the games we've mentioned so far, Detective Pikachu hinges a lot on its plot, so I won't say too much, but for a mystery game aimed at children, I'm genuinely impressed by how well the game's able to hide its true antagonist from being super obvious until the final act. In the bracket though, dare I say, Detective Pikachu got absolutely snubbed. I'd have pegged it as a winner against Master ZX, but the voting populace of 8 people said otherwise. Once it dropped a loser's bracket, sure, beating Rumble World was a cinch, but then it lost to Pokemon Pinball, a title I enjoy a decent bit, but surely Owain yelling a bolt of brilliance would be enough to beat the cute little game. Right? Evidently not, but hey, percentage-wise Detective Pikachu did at least make it to the upper half, landing at number 37, so that's something. Time for a second short break. Did y'all know I have a Discord? I do. I like to chat a fair bit despite how quiet it is in there sometimes about just about anything, be it video updates, my daily activities, my work on Reality Resort, and more. If that sounds like something you'd want to be a part of, check out my social media portion in the description. I also have a Twitter, a Blue Sky account that I just launched recently, and more, so check the tab out. Thanks for continuing to watch. Now let's get through another set of 16 games so that we're left with 32. Oh hey look, Picross, the game I was surprised won anything, landing here at 48th. Now listen, I do enjoy me a brain game from time to time, love Sudoku, but Picross just never clicked for me. Pokemon Picross does at least help me out a little bit by letting me have some idea of what I should be making, but at that point I'd rather just stare at the artwork. For the type of game it is, it works, but the mobile game type cooldown system is annoying and needs to die in an open fire. Picross is what I like to call a paradox game. A game that made it further than its percentage would lead you to believe, since in that regard, Picross is number 66, and down from the next game that lost in round 3 by nearly 12.5%. The one match it won against Sleep in the losers bracket was a 4-3 vote, so it barely squeaked by there. Outside of that, caught 2 total shutouts at the hands of Black and White 2 and Coliseum. It's just another little puzzle game, but hey, at least it's not another match 'em up type of puzzle game. We got the original Pokemon Ranger game at number 47, and while I was baffled by its early exit at first, the more I thought about its mechanics, the more sense it made. Ranger has a number of good qualities going for it. dungeon control, the emphasis of interacting with Pokemon and nature in a beneficial manner, with the obvious game exception of needing to burn things down, characterization, and of course, music. The main meat of a game, though, is where it falters, something its sequel cleaned up on quite considerably. With all 3 titles being housed on a Nintendo DS, in order to capture a Pokemon, you need to use your stylus to create loops around the Pokemon. Whereas Shadows of Almia and Guardian Signs worked off of an HP system, Ranger went with what I'll simply call a loop count, where a Pokemon needs to be circled X amount of times without the loop being interrupted or broken for the Pokemon to get caught. If your touchscreen is in rough shape, it ends up making the Ranger experience a lot rougher than it needs to be. This is especially true of the boss fights of the game, where you need to create 17 successful loops around Entei in a row, just to clear that one round in a fight against all the beasts. You might be saying, sure, 17, no problem. But when the Pokemon are running around and threatening thrown attacks from across the screen, it becomes a problem. That might be why Ranger performed as poorly as it did in the bracket, and why the game is usually a distant third when people compare the 3 Ranger games. Coliseum absolutely eviscerated Ranger, and while it sneaked out a narrow win against TCG1, Pokemon Go just ended up trouncing it in the very next round anyway. Ranger is an outlier in its little side series, and almost kind of deserves to rank all the way down here the more you think about it. Unite's up next at number 46, and on principle I kind of refuse to download this thing. MOBAs are not my thing at all. I'm more of a standard RPG guy with party game stuff thrown in there, but on top of that, the game was developed by a subsidiary of Tencent Games, which is a whole can of worms that I'd really rather not get into right now. Outside of that, thanks to watching Rosakin on Twitch, I can tell you the matches can get a bit formulaic at times, with there being a decent amount of balance issues from the jump. Maybe it's changed in the 6-ish months since I've seen anyone play it. Maybe it's a game where most things are viable now, but just not for me. No thank you, no ma'am. As for the bracket, it did fine enough for the quality of the game I feel like it is. It beat Troze, sure, but getting bashed in by Platinum and Guardian Signs? Sounds right to me. Now, how the hell did Pokemon Dash make it to number 45? For pure clarity, if we're talking overall placing here, since for 75 games, the midpoint would be number 38. So Dash outperformed its reputation by a pretty fair margin. That said, a lot of that is carried by going 10-0 on Cafe Remix, getting absolutely bodied by Super Mystery Dungeon and Aura shortly after. For those that weren't around when the game first dropped almost 20 years ago, Pokemon Dash is an open field racer where you're going around a map in various cups, going through checkpoints, trying to finish in first place. Outside of a fairly simple premise for what you can make a Pokemon-based racer like, a big factor is that you have all of these Pokemon on the cover, but you can only play as Mickey Mouse's static-infused cousin here. I think if they leaned more into an anime angle with over-the-top personalities and mini-campaigns you can go through with, say, 20 Pokemon, the game would have had a lot more to work with while not changing up the formula all that much. There's just no real reason to play this one as opposed to the Pokeathlon Dome minigame, where you're just doing laps in Heart Gold and Soul Silver. A minigame that unironically is more enjoyable, despite that minigame just being flicking the stylus to the right over and over again because of the setting. Rumble Rush comes in next at number 44, and this is another one of those, wait, that existed? Types of entries for me when creating the bracket. As such, there's not really much for me to say. Considering the game lasted for only a little more than a year in the App Store, I think the general public was feeling the same thing, but then again, it also could have been because the year was 2020. You fill in the blank star, I don't want YouTube to get mad at me. Thanks. From what I could see though, Rumble Rush was just more of the same old, just as a mobile app without any real shakeup to the Rumble formula. A formula that had grown indefinitely more stale the further in we got. I'll repeat what I said during Rumble World, I have no clue how the side series got 5 different games. As for how Rumble Rush got this high up, there's 2 key reasons. One, the matchup it won was against Mystery Dungeon WiiWare. That was always going to be an easy W because even an obscure mobile game that's part of a recognized series is going to be more popular off the cuff than a Japanese exclusive game most people don't even know exists in a series this big. 2, all 3 of the matches it had less than 10 votes cast in them. So mix that with decent performance against Detective Pikachu Returns, and it's going to be carried up a fair bit. Not super far, mind you, but farther up than it should in my humble opinion. That's a randomized bracket for you though. Oh hey look, it's that cute little pinball game I mentioned a few entries ago rolling in at number 43. Pokemon Pinball is such a cozy little game. And above all else, I want Nintendo to start making new pinball games soon. Mario Pinball Land may have spoiled the idea, but the Switch is such a good console for a game. Just sell a little stand that'll hold the Switch upright and use the Joy-Cons as flippers, either by button command or by motion. Boom! Perfect pinball setup. Pokemon Pinball is basically just pinball, but with the main goal of collecting all the Pokemon across 2 boards, including the rare Mewtwo and Mew. As it's pinball, there is a good amount of learning involved for getting precise angles and shots under very specific time constraints, which gives me all the more reason to recommend it just because of that skill ceiling. Pinball is also one of those games I would call snubbed, just off the fact that BDSP beat this thing by a singular vote. Then again, it did also snub Detective Pikachu immediately after, before getting trashed by Ultra Sun Ultra Moon, but that should have been BDSP down there if you ask me. Then again, I can take solace in the fact that pinball's percentage is nearly 10 points higher than BDSP's. More on that later. Later is not now, but we do have our first mainline entry on the list. No, literally, like the first. The very first ones. Red and Blue at number 42. Much like pinball though, this one is most definitely a snubbing because how the hell did Pokepark 2 knock this thing out of a tournament? Like, are y'all sure? You good? Red and Blue thrashing on Dreamworld before getting thrashed back by Black and White though, that I big agree on. Red and Blue are fascinating little games, mostly due to just how busted they are, but also because of how much freedom you have to explore after you get past Cerulean. Let's say, for whatever reason, you want to get the Silph Coast stuff out of the way ASAP, but had no idea how to get there. Easy. You go through Rock Tunnel, take Route 8's underground passageway to get to Celadon, then get the drink to give to the guards. That'll give you access to Saffron. You just need to clear the Celadon Game Corner and Pokemon Tower before you can do Silphco, which will then give you access to Sabrina. That sense of freedom and choosing your own adventure after going through the first 2 gyms is something you don't really see a lot of in the modern titles. You technically get that through Scarlet and Violet, but that's a whole other can of worms we'll talk about once that game's number is up. Plus, there's the fact that these titles started this whole media franchise, so need to give credit where credit's deserved. Oh look, another match 'em up game. It's been a minute since we had one, but Puzzle Challenge is up next to number 41. Given it's basically Puzzle League, which is Panel de Pon, but now on a Game Boy Color, I don't really have much of anything new to say for this segment. There's a Nigglybuff song though, and speaking as someone who loves the Wigglytuff line, that's fun for me. Puzzle Challenge ended up benefiting from small vote matchups. It lost 5-4 against Rumble Blast before winning 5-4 against Hey You Pikachu, which equalized it out. Then got bodied by Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, but the matchup only had 6 votes cast total. Cute little time if you need to do some mashing on the go. We have our next mainline here at number 40, and put your trees down, it's just Sword and Shield, y'all. I know there's been a myriad of thoughts and think pieces about the game from its inception, but allow me to just focus on one specific element really quick instead of the graphics, the incredibly easy gameplay, the ways Dynamax is as a mechanic, or the fact that the twist villain comes out of nowhere harder than the one in Big Hero 6. Sword and Shield are the first game since Generation 3 where you could not transfer your old Pokemon into the new titles. Well, all of them, anyway. Unlike every other previous game where you'd be able to transfer the Pokemon in so you can continue the journey you started with Turdy the Turtwig when you were 7, Sword and Shield barred off every Pokemon that was not included in the Pokedex of the base game or its DLC. On one hand, I get it. Keep the game a little more focused as you develop your first original mainline title. On the other hand, the animations themselves are pretty limited, with a solid amount just being rehashed from Generation 7 titles and just merely given an HD look. The use of that DLC to allow more Pokemon into the game without eventually allowing everything else accomplishes one simple task that they met with high marks repeatedly: selling nostalgia back to you. Do you need the DLC to use these old Pokemon? Well, no, but you will need to transfer everything in from Pokemon Home, which requires a Nintendo Online subscription, with the DLC just taunting you in the menu, begging you to buy it, making sure you have that fear of missing out just going up and up and up. The adoption of DLC also makes it so that we're most likely never seeing a third version of the mainline title ever again. A package that will most likely include these DLC packs for roughly the exact same price, while allowing a remix on the original story, or various issues to be addressed, such as performance or balancing. Sword and Shield beating Shadows of Elmia is a damn shame, but fortunately, Yellow and Red and Blue Rescue Team cleaned up the mess from there. There's much better Pokemon experiences you can find on the Switch. That's all I'm saying. Let me offer a little levity with a big ol', I don't know, send at number 39. TCG Live. This is a game that essentially replaced TCG Online, and have I touched it once? Nope. Taking a quick look, it seems like the same vein as TCG Online, just with updated graphics and more card packs due to the advancement and concept of time. Don't really have much to say on this one as a result, since it's just more cards, but what I can do is remark on the fact that it's the first game we're discussing to have won 2 matches. Ooh. After stumbling against Sleep, TCG Live squeaked past both Quest and Cafe Remix before getting shut out in one of the least voted matches of the tournament. A 5-vote match in which TCG Live received nothing against Pokemon Snap. Definitely one of the games of all time, and actually in a percentage tie with our very next entry. You'd think both of the last 2 main lines we talked about would have at least beat this one, but nope. Enter Diamond and Pearl at number 38, sitting at our halfway point in the much maligned fragment of Generation 4, just for how slow it can run sometimes, as well as HM reliance. Since we already know the myriad of issues that surround the base game, allow me to just state the cases like Diamond and Pearl are exactly the reason why we need that third version. Those third versions accomplish 4 main tasks. Expanding on the region geographically, offering a wider variety of Pokemon to be caught, adding in new elements to the story that can either add a dimension to what was already there, remix it into something new, or fix up something that was a little off in the original, and most importantly to Diamond and Pearl, enhance the overall performance of the game. Do the third versions typically sell less? Sure, and that's going to happen with pretty much every re-release of a game, with some exceptions mostly being owed to time. All of 4 of these elements were accomplished with the third version of the Sinnoh games, Platinum, to such a degree that everyone was upset when BDSP didn't take a lot more from that third version. We can go over all of that another time with enough interest though, if you guys are curious. As for tournament results, Diamond and Pearl were correctly beaten by Gold and Silver in one of the most voted on games in the tournament before stopping Art Academy, then being knocked out by Gold and Silver's third version Crystal in a wider percentage berth than Gold and Silver accomplished. Less votes, sure, but percentage-wise 5-2 is a harsher loss than 11-7. Funny how that third version just ended up swinging through though, huh? As much as I like our number 37 entry, Pinball Ruby and Sapphire, they kind of do just boil down to just being pinball. But again, credit where credit's due though, the wheel wasn't broken, so why would they bother fixing it? The main addition would be the additional boss minigames that were sprinkled in thanks to Ruby and Sapphire having their own box legendary, with Rayquaza naturally being the next fight up from there. There is also the matter of a Pokedex to tackle once again, which is the entire Hoenn Pokedex minus Deoxys but plus the Johto Trio and Aerodactyl? For some reason. There's 205 Pokemon this time though, with some rarity and hard tricks to pull off for a couple of them, namely Jirachi, so there's more than enough to chew on here as a result. I was hoping this game would go at least a little further, at least make the top 32, but unfortunately that was not meant to be. Tournament-wise, after getting bopped by Fire Red and Leaf Green, Pinball Ruby and Sapphire was able to squeak past Battle Revolution and beat Dream Radar before barely losing to Masters EX in a 15-vote matchup. If you ask me, it should have beat both that game and the game that it would have had to take on next, as you'll eventually see of Master EX's matchups, but I can fully acknowledge that this take is incredibly full of bias. But also I don't care, it's my opinion, so. We got another mainline here at number 36, that being Sun and Moon. I remember when Sun and Moon first dropped, I was going to do a 24-hour stream of the game. I set myself up with all the refreshments I needed, got nice and cozy, and then quickly realized two things before the 2-hour mark was up. One, I realized I chose the wrong character model, as one I went for was a little too tan to match up with me. Two, and more importantly, I was burnt all the way out. I was just exiting my little shiny hunting kick that I exercised in excruciating detail in X and Y, to the point where I was keeping lists to make sure I was successfully chain fishing every fish possible. And I needed a goddamn poke break. Or at least a goddamn poke break from mainline titles. I forgot exactly what I played to get over that. I think it was Planet Robobot and another replay of both Mario Tennis GBA and Explorers the Sky, but it took me a couple months before I actually sank back into the game proper if my memory serves. I could be wrong though, it could have just been a couple days, but I know I was playing Robobot around the same time. Great game by the way, go play more Kirby games. Homework for the heart. Anywho, Sun and Moon were definitely a shake on the formula, undercut by one element, the island system. I get why this was done, to help with the journey of both Lily and Hao to give a more natural flow of progression to their plots. However, by chopping what would normally be an interwoven region into 4 circles, Sun and Moon end up losing quite a bit when it comes to the exploration side of things. An element that I feel was a big driver for the series' success. That ability to find something new pretty much everywhere you turned, diving deeper and deeper into things or coming back to areas that you may not have had access to or simply did not know they existed. For me, that's my biggest gripe with the Alola games. That and being the start of an EXP all system that could not be turned off. But again, tale for another time. Going into the bracket though, Sun and Moon were games that absolutely got snubbed. But given it was by Stadium 2, maybe that's okay. Sun and Moon losing hard to Heart Gold and Soul Silver and beating Magikarp Jump almost as hard makes total sense. Losing 6-5 to Stadium 2 when it could have absolutely jumped Detective Pikachu Returns the very next round, ended up cutting a run that should have been able to be a lot closer to its re-release than Sun and Moon ended up being. Oh, also, first game we're discussing that got more than 50% of the total votes it was eligible for. That's neat. New Pokemon Snap's up next at number 35, and I remember the energy around this release was so high at the time. A Pokemon Snap sequel or re-release was desired for the longest time, especially with consoles that seemed like they'd be able to handle the concept just fine. In particular, the Wii thanks to motion controls, the Wii U thanks to those same motion controls and the gamepad, and the 3DS with its gyro controls. It's going to sound like a silly no duh type statement considering the type of game that it is, but New Pokemon Snap is the prettiest Pokemon game on the Switch by a country mile. Bandai Namco cooked up something wonderful with this title here. Something that probably would not capture the exact same magic as the original, but offer the player that exact same experience of being able to see these Pokemon up close in their natural habitats, going on a safari of sorts and doing some animal observation work. I have no desire to return to college at the moment, but I would genuinely want to go into zoology or something related to animal work if the option were ever feasible and appealing. It's not the same as being up close with animals in real life, but hey, this is pretty in a good time. I'll take it for the interim. I don't exactly agree with New Snap losing to XY, let alone in a 13-4 vote, and it losing to Gold and Silver could be a toss-up for me, but its 2 wins against Battle Troze and TCG2 make complete sense to me. New Pokemon Snap definitely deserves more flowers than it gets though. Please, go check it out if you want a great time on the Switch with Pokemon. We have 2 games left before our top 32, and at number 34 we have a mainline set of games that got clipped a little too early, Ruby and Sapphire, bringing in the 3rd generation with a plum, thanks to 45,467 trumpets, the introduction of nature's inabilities, and a sprawling region designed with the plot's main conflict directly in mind. I would say the only downside would be that there isn't that much to do in the post-game, especially in comparison to Emerald, but you have the new system of contests to play around with that offer a nice diversion from the norm, as well as some legendary hunting in the Reggie Trio. Ignoring Emerald's existence, Ruby and Sapphire are a lovely evolution of the Generation 2 titles, thanks to mechanical shifts and again the contest system, while asking the player if one should really intervene with how nature runs its course just for more quote-unquote desirable results. There's an undercurrent of conservationism there, which is why the Ranger Trainer class being introduced here fits like a glove, and later on springboarding into the Ranger series. If it has all of these good qualities then, why did Ruby and Sapphire end up being this low? Complete and utter snubbery. Plain and simple. Its wins against both Pokepark titles? Without question, no duh. The 7-5 loss against Stadium 2, which again is a fine game, just not better than the Gen 3 mainline titles in my opinion, and especially the 6-5 loss against Arceus stun a little bit. On the bright side, voting percentage-wise, Ruby and Sapphire sit pretty high up for a set of games eliminated in the third round, being 13th in that ranking. Question is, what other game knocked down in the third round could have beat Ruby and Sapphire in percentage? Why, nothing short of the biggest snub in the bracket, if you ask me. Introducing Ranger Shadows of Almia, a much improved sequel in the Pokemon Ranger series, clocking in at number 33, and, more impressively, number 11 for overall voting percentage. Let's get those tournament results out of the way really quickly before I go into why I love this game. Almia started with one of the biggest matches of the tournament, squishing Heyu Pikachu with a 16-3 vote. After that was Sword and Shield, which we already discussed, but is still a baffling loss in my opinion. The original Rumble was never going to win against Almia, but then we get to Rescue Team DX. I say this as a huge Mystery Dungeon person. Almia should not have lost 6-5 against Rescue Team DX. It's a wonderful remake, don't get me wrong, but Shadows of Almia hits everything the original Ranger did right and just keeps cranking it up. From the stakes, to the plot, to music, to a much improved capture system, complete with your number of possible partner Pokemon being raised to 17, one for each type at that time. Especially with such a strong start, it should have made that top 32 cut, but such is the way things go. At least it went out on a strong note. And now time for break number 3 before we hop into that top 32. Did you guys know that I have a Patreon? I do. I'll admit I'm not the best at running it and will eventually be looking for a manager on that side of things to help me out, but right now the Patreon is tooled to the Ultimate Playlist series. If you guys have any perks you'd like to see, let me know, as well as ideal pricing. I'm always happy to take notes. But first tier currently starts at $5 a month, so please, go check it out. The support would go a long way, starting with thumbnail financing and moving on up from there. Thanks for the support and for watching this far. Let's go ahead and tackle these next 16 games, beginning with the round 4 losers. Detective Pikachu Returns is a letdown springing off the heels of the original game, so I'm not entirely surprised that of all the round 4 losers, it's at the bottom of that list at number 32. In short, Detective Pikachu's whole mystery is trying to figure out where Tim's dad is, and by the end of the game you get the closure you really need. The game could have just ended there, or 15 minutes after with a more detailed explanation with no further plot needed. Instead, we continue on the hunt we left behind in the first game, with an answer that all of us who played the first game or even watched the movie would know. It's not the type of game that can really have a sequel because of its ending, and yet it exists. It insists upon itself, really. I think the results of the tournament reflect that quite nicely, given both Explorers the Sky and Stadium 2 stomped Detective Pikachu Returns quite thoroughly, with its wins coming off of a relatively unknown match-em-up game and a mobile game in a series that should have ended 3 to 4 entries ago. That game against Shuffle helped the percentage out big time. Otherwise, I think we'd be looking mid to low 30s on this thing. If you're buying a Pokemon spin-off or the Switch of all the titles mentioned so far, first and foremost, swing for new Pokemon Snap, followed by either Rescue Team DX or Pokken DX. You'll be able to squeeze 5,287% more enjoyment out of one of those titles alone than you will out of Detective Pikachu Returns. Gold and Silver chime in next at number 31. The last 2 entries, we've talked about a follow-up that drastically improves on its series' formula, and another that just existed just to exist, somehow being behind the plotline of the movie. How a second movie is being planned is beyond me. Anyway, Gold and Silver I feel falls more into the Shadows of the Almia camp. That's a weird sentence you didn't think you'd hear today, huh? Squeezing a whole second region onto a Game Boy Color cartridge is astounding, and being able to see Kanto 2 years after the original journey that started it all is pretty damn cool. We also got several landmark introductions here. The day and night cycle, friendship, the IV system, and breeding, just to name a few things. Mix that with the more traditional, low-key vibe Johto goes for, and you have a pretty endearing experience all the way through. Of course, Johto is not without its flaws. Hitting a level flatline vent spike at the end of a game is going to throw anyone off, and the Team Rocket plotline feels more like an afterthought more than anything. There's also the availability of some of the Johto Pokemon being locked to after Johto, but fortunately Heart Gold and Soul Silver was able to improve on this matter a fair bit. Still though, for ancient games in the modern lens, Gold and Silver do a remarkable job of capturing exactly what makes Pokemon so captivating. As for the bracket, unlike the last few entries, I think Gold and Silver exited at exactly the right moment given its matchups. Should the win against Diamond and Pearl have been wider than a 12-7? Absolutely, them shits is terrible. But a loss against XD, a slight win against New Pokemon Snap, and a steep loss against Oraz all make pretty good sense in the grand scheme of things. Moving right along, we have 2 games in a row that I've never touched, but at number 30 rests Pokepark 2. Real being real, I thought this thing would have been out incredibly quickly, but there was a decent amount of support behind the title. It got 4 votes in its loss against Ruby and Sapphire before knocking TCG Online, Troze, and bizarrely enough, Red and Blue all in quick succession. Our first game to win 3 matches, by the way. God damn, Pokepark 2. A very slim win against a mainline title and larger losses against Ruby and Sapphire and Rescue Team DX is what ended up sinking Pokepark 2 to the lower end of around 4 losers, but like, it got to the top 32. Call it a bracket blessing, I guess. But at any rate, never touched Pokepark 2 in any capacity outside of a goated Oshawott song, so let me know your opinion of the game down in the comments, please. Thanks! There's also Masters EX, sitting at number 29. To my understanding, this one's yet another mobile game that runs more like a gacha game, as you try to pull trainers, trying to build a strong team with sync skills to win 3v3 battles. Or see Steven in 7 different outfits. There's always that one character in those gacha games, I swear, but hey, if anyone's getting the fan service treatment, I'm glad it's Steven. Man deserves it for running a fun team. That said, gacha games aren't really my forte in general, just off the fact that you're going to have an advantage if you pay money to get more pulls, or better odds rolls, or exclusive items, etc, etc. It's the same reason I dropped Fire Emblem Heroes. That, and I was tired of seeing Camilla's ample personality hiding her actual character every time I did anything with the player versus player interactivity. But that tangent could be talked about more once I get to that video. As for the tournament itself, I already touched on how I thought Masters EX beating Detective Pikachu was just weird, but an 8-7 win against Pinball Ruby and Sapphire hurt a little bit just because pinball is such a fundamentally fun time. Neither its wins or losses are particularly strong though, which is most likely why Masters EX floated right near that 50% line. Also, I feel like some of the votes it caught were because from its name you could form the phrase Master Set. Red and Blue Rescue Team sails in at the number 28 spot, and since I want to blab about this one a fair bit, let me lead with the tournament results. Losing against Mystery Dungeon Time of Darkness, totally understandable, but this is another game that had its wings clipped pretty early. Pulling off wins against the games it did, those being Stadium 1, Pokken DX, and Sword and Shield, was impressive all on its own, and suggested a pretty strong run. Guardian Signs ended up stepping in the way, and while I enjoy Guardian Signs a fair bit, it's a bit like the situation with Shadows of Valmia where, while I like both games, the better one probably lost? Instead of dwelling on that though, let me instead focus on Red and Blue Rescue Team's greatest strength, its messaging. Accompanied by wonderful music all throughout the campaign, the biggest thing this first punch into the series wants to get across is that even when you feel all alone, you never are. Someone's always going to be right around the corner to give you the company that you need in this life, or help you in a time of need. We see it over and over again throughout the campaign, from the various villagers that need help to when you're a refugee on the run from false accusations, and Pokemon that want to tear you apart on the basis of these accusations. The only thing we can do in this life is try to be the truest versions of ourselves that we can, helping out when we can and creating a world that everyone wants to live in. The first time you see those yellow sparkles of energy at the main campaign's end sticks with you. An event meant to mark the end of your time with the Pokemon you've been with day in and day out, literally saving the world from multiple different calamities at this point. Power of friendship and needing to let you access the postgame obviously end up winning out, but even bigger than that, it's a reminder that even when you're going to go your separate ways, the bonds you make will stick with you as you move through life. It's the type of messaging that you usually see in a Persona game, most especially Persona 4, which wasn't even out yet when Red and Blue Rescue Team dropped. But for a fledgling spin-off, the landing is stuck so incredibly well that I needed to properly give it its 10s. I'd love absolutely nothing more than to talk about this game and the other Mystery Dungeon games at length, but I'm afraid that's going to have to wait for another time. We have a trio of mainline games closing out for round 4 losers, beginning with Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee in 27th. This is basically just another Kanto remake, and we've already talked about Kanto's strengths back in the Red and Blue section, so instead I'll just talk about 2 strong points and 1 weak point with this specific title. Starting with a weak point, it's the Go mechanics themselves. I get why they were kept, to try to appeal to the fans of a mobile game, but trying to accurately throw a ball to the side with motion controls is hell, especially when everything can simply run away whenever it so chooses. On the other hand, the game is definitely pretty, and has the look I really wish BDSP had adopted. There's also the element of the co-op gameplay for the player 2s in our lives. Does it bust the important battles even more wide open than the EXP All system does, especially when you're encouraged to catch multiple of the same thing? Absolutely. But that dumpstering on the computer can be quite fun sometimes. A whole power trip, if you will. In terms of the bracket, I think once I put my personal bias aside, this one fell out at just the right time. Its wins were definitely against some weaker titles, and only fell to both Explorers of Sky and to Arceus. I'd say overall that Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee is a very middle-of-the-road mainline, and while I don't consider either of its losses to be against mainline titles, definitely more on that later, there's nothing to really complain about with it falling out where it did, especially as it ranks within the top 20 in terms of voting percentage. Crystal's up next at 26th, and I already glazed the base game plenty, but the limited editions were really nice. There's the Ruins of Valve plotline for one thing, and also releasing Extreme Speed Dratini out of the world, before the system communication situation happened jumping in Gen 3, which fortunately Heart Gold and Soul Silver rectified. But the biggest improvement above all else is the introduction of a female protagonist. I remember saying it on a Twitch stream once. Something I haven't done in a while thinking about it. But I remember saying on a Twitch stream once that whenever the option for a female protagonist is offered, for the first playthrough I'll usually choose them for 2 reasons. One, in games where romances are offered, it usually means I can date the guys that I want to date without any issues or loss of gameplay mechanics. Looking at you, Fire Emblem Fates. But 2, there's just inherently different perspectives that you're able to receive by hopping into the shoes of a sex or gender that doesn't align with your own. Obviously, Pokemon isn't really offering much of anything in this regard outside of Brendan coming off initially sexist as a result in the Hoenn titles if you're looking through a cynical lens, but just the option to play as a girl is good for that perspective shift, and those that want to play as a character that's closer to who they really are as a person. The matchups Crystal had were relatively easy in comparison to some of the games we've talked about already, especially Red Blue Rescue Team, with its 3 wins stemming from Battle Revolution, TCG 2, and Diamond and Pearl. X and Y taking down Crystal wasn't exactly on my bingo card, but hey, it happened. And then Pokemon Snap was able to deal the final blow. Great game though, and worthy of reaching this high. To close out for round 4 losers, in 25th we got Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. I actually don't have much faults on this one, but that's entirely a consequence of how I decided to play it. Before I hop into that though, tournament results. Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon ended up benefiting massively off of both of its wins against Dream Radar and Pinball being near blowouts, whilst its loss by 2 votes both times to Fire Red and Leaf Green and Coliseum were of pretty large aid. That ended up leaving Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon with a pretty lofty percentage and cracking into the top 10 voting percentage-wise at number 9, despite a slightly early exit. Now, the question that's probably been on your mind for the last couple seconds, why do I not have much thoughts on this one? Well, you see, Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon dropped very shortly after I moved down to Texas, and at the time I was on a be your best self type of kick. For me, part of that was trying to enforce the 4 years of French I learned in high school. As such, I ended up playing Ultra Sun in French. Twice now, actually. I can tell you very basic info about the plot, but anything about those space dorks with the Poiple, no clue. To make up for it though, really quickly, some of my favorite French Pokemon names. Psyduck and Golduck are Psycho Quack and Aqua Quack respectively. Cutiefly is Bombidou. Cottonee is Duduve. Rockruff is Rokupo, and Komala is Dodoala, just to name a few. Probably butchered that last one, I am so sorry. If you haven't before, do a game in a different language at least once. It'll save a language marker too for when you transfer the Pokemon into home or a different game, so hey, easy Masuda time. It's a fun time, trust me. Anywho, with round 4 done, let's hop into our 8 round 5 losers. We kick the set of 8 off with an abomination of a mainline title, one that's led by its first 2 rounds by a singular vote, only to get bodied by 2 games that have the misfortune of sharing the categorization of mainline with this title. I am, of course, talking about Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, which rolled in 24th place. But Joey, you say, surely they can't be that bad, right? Right? Girl... The amount of different think pieces I can go on right now, but allow me to just focus on the biggest issue. This is just Diamond and Pearl again, but in HD. There's no real remixes on the story like with past remix, especially coming off the heels of Auras in this department, and some things are actively downgraded. The biggest thing butchered here has to be the contest system, which has been converted into one-button Guitar Hero without a very solid way to influence anything. EXP also fucks with bouncing a little bit, and if you get the free Mew and Jirachi and Floramora because you have data from Sword and Shield and Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee on your Switch, even easier. Mars' Per Ugly has never been easier to get past. No expansion of the region in general, let alone not bringing back the Distortion World during the story or bringing back the Battle Frontier starring my Queen Dahlia with her kick-ass facility song, also just makes this thing not really worth it. You're legitimately better off just getting Platinum and playing that if you want a version of Sinnoh. Outside of the 3 mythicals, there's legitimately no reason to play BDSP. Bracket-wise, it gets even more maddening. Just barely beating both Pinball and Masters EX by a singular vote, which allowed it to get pretty far. Fortunately though, it got absolutely demolished by Black and White 2 and Auras, which gives it an even lower voting percentage than motherfucking Pokemon Dash, and 10 percentage points lower than the next game that fell out during the 5th round. Seriously though, much like Sword and Shield, there are much better Pokemon experiences on the Switch. Go for new Pokemon Snap, Rescue Team DX, or Pokken Tournament DX. It'll be much more worth your money. I promise you that. This next entry we can keep mercifully short considering we've already talked about both Red and Blue and Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee at this point. But at number 23, we have Pokemon Yellow. The first third version in the series, Pokemon Yellow has 2 big things as its selling point. One, Pikachu being your starter and taking slightly more cues from the anime as a result, including a little friendship system to mimic how Pikachu slowly warmed up to Ash during his Indigo League journey. 2, the ability to get all 3 of the original starters through NPC events that involve either clearing specific battle tasks or just showing enough love to your little rodent. Outside of those 2 factors, some bug fixes, and some team tweaking, it's all the same old Kanto we've known and loved from the jump. Bracket-wise, Yellow might have gotten a touch screwed, but I don't think it would have gotten past this 5th round regardless without an insanely lucky bracket. It triumphing over Rumble U was a big no-duh moment, and seeing it squeak past Sword and Shield was a nice surprise, but collapsing hard against both Platinum and Stadium 2 makes a good deal of sense. If you're keeping track without Johto being included, this would make Fire Red and Leaf Green the highest ranked iteration of Kanto. So, if you need your time with Professor Oak and Sabrina, that's your game. Mystery Dungeon Explorers of Time and Darkness is up next in number 22. Before I touch on the game briefly, I'll just go over tournament results real quick because even if Explorers of Sky is incredibly loved, I didn't expect the original versions to do as well as they did after the bracket was finalized. After beating both Red and Blue Rescue Team followed by its remake, it completely blacked out against Black and White and took an L against Arceus as well. Makes a decent deal of sense to me, even if I disagree with that last result. Anyway, for Time and Darkness, most of the plot elements I'd like to save for when we get to Explorers of Sky, so instead I'll highlight the difference between these 2 initial versions and Sky, for those that don't know. Time and Darkness have some version exclusivity much like the mainline titles, but Sky includes every Pokemon. Time and Darkness also have a few less starters, namely missing the absolutely goated Riolu. The biggest thing though is simply that Time and Darkness do not have the special episodes. A set of side stories you can engage in at any point after you unlock them. The side stories flesh out the surrounding cast incredibly well and hit some emotional strong points, especially the ones for Wigglytuff and the Pokemon from the future. Spinner's Cafe is also missing, and that shit's incredibly fun to gamble in. Overall, a solid game that you can't go wrong with, unless you're comparing against Explorers of Sky. It was just never going to win the bracket. Oh hey look, Fire Red and Leaf Green just missing the top 20 and landing at number 21. The last iteration of just Kanto that we've to see on this list, Fire Red and Leaf Green's main contributor is the Sevi Islands, bringing with it a whole bunch of Pokemon that were unable to be obtained in the Hoenn titles, as well as plenty of other secrets to explore, such as Moltres on 1 island, Team Rocket's island hideout on 5 island, and Tanobi Key on 7 island. Also on 7 Island, Trainer Tower. This tower is very similar to Trainer Hill in Emerald and acts as a time attack mode, where you're trying to get to the top of a tower as quickly as possible. Not really for me, but it's a nice little diversion. Fire Red and Leaf Green did not have an easy bracket at all, so the placement is all the more impressive to me. Beating Pinball, Ruby, and Sapphire? Sure, easy, why not? Squeaking out a win against Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon while losing to Pokemon Snap by just a singular vote though? That makes for a decently good run. There is also the fact that Emerald stomped this thing, but duh. At any rate, good game good. I have no words. How the hell did Rumble Blast make it to 20th? Like, legitimately speaking, with how the other Rumble games got tossed off a cliff. How? The answer honestly resides in facing similarly weak competition, beating the original Rumble, Puzzle Challenge, and Rumble Rush before getting completely shut out against Scarlet and Violet and barely losing to Guardian Signs. That last part might sound weird, but that matchup did only get 5 votes, so hey, it could have been dumped on harder. As for the game, I don't know, I got nothing, I never played it. Considering it was the second title, it was probably the same deal as the original Rumble, but with small tweaks in how levels were designed, but the same monotonous crap the series has always been. I ask once more, how'd Rumble get 5 games again? Another mystery dungeon game coming in at 19th, this time being the remake of Red and Blue Rescue Team DX. For me, this game accomplishes 2 main things. The first being that a specific art style can go a long way because my god these games are pretty. Everything looks like it's coming out of the pages of an old picture book, which suits a remake of a 20-year-old game perfectly. Secondly, that Spike Chunsoft is absolutely aware of the fanbase the series has, meaning we could eventually see Explorers of Sky DX one day. God, if only. The inclusion of shiny Pokemon, being able to have a team of 8 Ongu at once, and rare qualities are all fine additions to an already calculated game, bringing a lovely story into a new era. I'd like to apologize for any ragging I did on this remake now during the Shadows of Valmia segment. I'm mostly just baffled at that game falling out when it did. Rescue Team DX may not be my favorite Pokemon Switch title, but the one I'd recommend most so we can get more Mystery Dungeon content. Also, it's still a really good time, so please, for me, thanks. Just 2 left of a set of losers. At number 18, we have Pokemon Coliseum, done by Genius Sonority before they put Turtwig through the harsh training of being a Starbucks barista. This game, as well as its sequel title XD, stand in a very odd place in Pokemon history, being the first fully 3D adventures, but not being counted as mainline titles, most likely due to playing entirely differently from the mainlines. More on that in a little bit. Coliseum is my favorite of the 2, being this quirky little thing with insane difficulty spikes at points, and especially ratcheting up during the endgame. Then again, that could also be due to my playstyle during these titles, which isn't great, I'll admit. What I'll typically do is go all in on trying to purify the shadow Pokemon you can take from the enemy trainers during my campaign, still keeping Espeon in the front spot for big psychic damage, but placing Umbreon in the back seat while I go through all of the shadow Pokemon I'm carrying with me, up to 4 at a time. Once one is fully purified, I'll toss it in the PC and grab the next one, repeating the process. I fully acknowledge now, definitely not the way to play if you want to save time. The game also goes for the generation's new double battles as the primary battle form throughout the entire campaign, letting the player work on specific combinations. Some of the enemies also have simple but thought out strategies of their own that the player will have to contend with, mostly in the lane of their bosses. Dakeem goes for an Earthquake plus Protect strategy, Venus will opt for Attract and whatever other statuses she can fling, and Ain will go for Rain synergy, just to name a few. Because of the grit this game packs with its scenery and protagonist, I do actually prefer this game over XD, but definitely understand people who prefer that second title. Coliseum had an interesting bracket run, but just couldn't really go anywhere against Emerald. As much as I love Conquest, I did think Coliseum would at least beat that one, but no. The 3 wins it did pick up, a close one against Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, and shutouts against both Ranger and Picross, made complete sense to me. I can only pray that Coliseum and XD end up getting a remaster or re-release at some point, but games are just too unique and cool to fall away into the shadows. Get it? Shadows. I'll shut up, I'm sorry. Closing out our round 5 losers is a game that I was not expecting to score so well, but Mimics results will do that for you. Super Mystery Dungeon, clocking in at 17th in the bracket and 3rd in the voting percentage rankings. Allow me to go over results here, because as a game often contested as the best mystery dungeon, I definitely have some thoughts to brief on very quickly. The wins against Quest and Dash, absolutely agree, no questions asked. Losing against XD, I completely get it. But this game losing in a 4-3 vote against Go is baffling to me. What Super Mystery Dungeon gets right is the same thing Explorers of Sky gets right. Its characterization. From humble beginnings in a small little village all the way until you join the Expedition Society, you really get a good sense of just who some of these characters really are. I'd give the biggest points for this to Nuzleaf and Ampharos, without question. I won't go into why without spoilers though. There's also the mission system, ditching what was laid out in Gates to Infinity and instead going for the aspect of connecting all the Pokemon. Some of these Pokemon connections are a bit innocuous though, admittedly, such as Darmanitan and Slugma. Why are they connected? Hell if I know. That said, a lot of these connections can be traced back to the previous 3 titles and the relationships formed there, such as Alakazam being tied to Charizard and Tyranitar in a callback to Team ACT from Red and Blue Rescue Team, or Wigglytuff having connections to Igglybuff, Bidoof, Lopunny, and Chatot to call back to the special episode revolving around Wigglytuff's exploration origins, the Wigglytuff Guild in large, Team Charm, and how close he is with Chatot during the Explorers games. A lovely set of world building that had only one caveat. Once you've connected with every single Pokemon, you're kind of just done with the game. Connections and ranks are inherently connected, and that top rank is much easier to reach than the ones in games past as a result. That said, you would have played for quite a while by that point, so the drop-off makes a decent deal of sense as well. As for the debate of Super Mystery Dungeon versus Explorers of Sky for that top Mystery Dungeon game, I'd have to agree with the bracket and give that title to Explorers of Sky. I didn't even get into the Amera system here, which is definitely good, don't get me wrong, but the gameplay tweaks don't really make up for some of the simplifications done in the plot. The Explorers games are consistent throughout, leaving this feeling of wanting to uncover the truth throughout the entire adventure, whereas Super Mystery Dungeon can feel a bit stop and go at points, especially in the beginning, which feels like a whole different game in comparison to once you join the Expedition Society. Still a great time for sure, and 3DS title I'd absolutely recommend, but the birth between Explorers and Super Mystery Dungeon is still a wide one. Now that we've reached our top 16, allow me to use this final break to go over the remaining titles. We actually have an even split of spin-offs and mainlines left, showing just how strong those spin-offs can be in the entire franchise. A good amount of these titles are also from generations 3 through 5, which are generally looked at as the high point of a franchise. At the end of the day, there's so many ways to interact with the series and get your enjoyment that you can't really go wrong. So, play what you like. Well, unless it's BDSP, in which case we need to sit down and have a quick little chat. With this being the final break, please let me know how I can improve on the editing for future bracket discussion videos down in the comments. I'm always looking to improve. And also to take a break from recording soon. I'm gonna get that after I finish recording all these paragraphs, but I'm doing this all in one day. My voice is feeling so raspy right now. Oh my god. Now, without further ado, our round 6 losers. The 16th through 13th placers. Kicking us off is a game that I don't entirely like, but I can at least see the appeal of. Legends Arceus, coming in at number 16. As you saw in the break, despite Game Freak calling this one a mainline, I don't see it at all. Progression and gameplay, much like Coliseum and XD, are quite a bit different from all the mainline titles, opting for more of a survival aspect as you brave the elements and do research to complete the first ever Pokedex. One thing I'll absolutely give this game credit for is the shiny sparkle sound. If we're going to do only overworld encounters from now on, this is the way to do it. That way we know we're not missing anything. Looking at you, Scarlet and Violet. Outside of that, the game is fine, I guess? Just a little too repetitive for my taste, and one I don't think I'll be picking up again unless I go to re-record all the footage I had originally done for a series retrospective that's now either outdated or lost. I just remember watching the bracket from the sidelines and hoping the game would eventually fall, but it just kept winning. The first game we're discussing to win both 4 and 5 matches actually, picking up W's against Guardian Signs, Magikarp Jump, Most baffling to me, Ruby and Sapphire. Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, and Mystery Dungeon Explorers of Time and Darkness. I sincerely don't understand the win against Ruby and Sapphire, but hey, relatively small voting pool. Gotta take this all with a grain of salt. Seeing a near unanimous 16-1 loss against Heart Gold and Soul Silver in a bracket full of 8 to 10 vote matches was incredibly funny to me though, I need to say. The close loss against Pokemon Snap was nice to see as well. Whatever Legend ZA has going on, I hope it's a good shakeup on the formula presented in Arceus. Also, please, bring us Flow at Eternal. It's been too damn long since we first learned about it. And 15th is our last mobile game on the list, Pokemon Go. I dropped this thing before the second generation Pokemon got added, so I can't really speak on the current product, but the phenomenon this thing was at launch just cannot be understated. There's literally news stories out there of people moving in droves to catch a Snorlax that popped up on the map, which is really crazy to think about this far out from a game's launch. Did you play Pokemon Go? Are you still playing now, or when did you drop the game? Let me know in the comments. Bracket-wise, I would say it had a relatively easy time, exclusively going against spin-offs outside of games stomped on by Black and White 2, but most entertaining to me was the fact that it got stopped by Guardian Signs, a game I thought would have dropped out a round or two before where I thought Shadow's Valmia did. More on that little game later. If you're still playing, be careful out there and get those Shadow Pokemon. Or Pikachu and hats, or whatever you kids do in that game these days. I don't know. We mentioned Conquest a little bit ago, and here it is now in 14th place. As a fan of a tactical RPG genre for the likes of Fire Emblem, Conquest ticks off a couple boxes that I'd been wanting in the Pokemon series for a little bit by that time. A more feudal game, a more tactical game, and a game with a hot guy who makes me actually want to use Charizard. Yes, I'm a big Yukimura stan, and I'll stand by that proclamation. I don't care. The game in general makes you consider a lot every turn, be it the warlords that you want to carry with you throughout your campaign or where you want to station each guy. If you want to make an advance to take over more enemy territory or shore up your resources, all set to a lovely OST going for a more traditional approach. There's a remix I want to share here that doesn't have that many views, a remix of the Aurora Battlefield theme by CFX_music with only 350-ish views as of posting this that goes incredibly hard. Seriously, please, go check it out, you won't regret it. Conquest's run went decently enough, beating Gates to Infinity and the Juggernaut Snap and Coliseum, Undone by XY by a singular vote, and Explores the Sky by a wider margin. This is another one that needs a remake or re-release ASAP. Koei Tecmo, I beg of you, please make it happen. Rounding out our round 6 losers, in 13th place we have Stadium 2. Now, I didn't grow up with an N64, so I can't really speak on how impactful the Stadium games truly were. All I can really say is that it's Pokemon Stadium, but again, this time with Generation 2 Pokemon in the mix though. Very fun. Bracket-wise, Stadium 2 definitely got a rough bracket, but did incredibly well for itself, winning against Ruby and Sapphire, Sun and Moon, and Yellow. Detective Pikachu Returns 2, I guess, but that game pales in comparison to the Everfree. A very close loss in Scarlet and Violet, as well as a loss to Oraz, ended up knocking this one out of commission. But hey, for a battle simulator for consoles, 13th is pretty neat. Now we have our round 7 losers, beginning with 12th place providing us X and Y. X and Y's placement genuinely shocks me, as a slight defender of the 6th generation and seeing what could have been for a third entry for the Kalos games. Winning by 9 votes against new Pokemon Snap is nothing to sneeze at, in a bracket where none of the matches crack 20 votes, and the wins against both Crystal and Conquest are equally interesting. Heart Gold and Soul Silver, as well as Guardian Signs, ended up being the death of this one in the bracket. But speaking on Generation 6, I think if they just made this thing a little bit harder and leaned a little bit more into the quest for what Lysander continues to be a beautiful world, we'd have an all-timer on our hands. I'm not entirely sure what happened, but it almost feels like X and Y were half finished in some areas, namely in how the Elite Four only has 4 Pokemon, and how some of the Pokemon the gym leaders are using only have 3 moves. Fans of shiny hunting are in luck here though, with the Pokeradar returning from the Generation 4 games alongside Chain Fishing, Board Encounters, and Friend Safari all joining the fray, allowing for plenty of options to make that Magikarp go gold. There's always going to be that stain on Generation 6 though, where it's following up some of the most loved games in the series, in Black and White 1 and 2. I think for what it's worth, there was definitely an effort here, at least halfway. It just could have been stronger and more fleshed out is all. Speaking of definitely needing a little more effort here and that it could have been just a little bit stronger, just missing the top 10 at number 11 is Scarlet and Violet. I hope with all the bugs and glitches that were widely reported about this thing from the jump, as well as performance issues that still bug this thing to this day, that Game Freak got the memo and are now aiming to take a longer time with game creation. Sure seems to be the case for Legend of ZA anyway, where we've gotten basically nothing new in the way of news or peaks since its announcement back in February 2024. Outside of everything graphical, I think Scarlet and Violet's biggest sin has to be half-baking the open world concept. I know the region opens up a lot more once you get Miraidon or Koraidon, and especially after you start going through Arven's storyline, but you technically don't even need to do any of that. There's a bunch of little hillsides near Los Platos, but one in particular that catches my eye is this little one here where you can get Pokemon to spawn on the other side of it. The lock-on window isn't wide, but you can actually lock onto a Pokemon here, teleport over to the other side, and start exploring the rest of the region before you so much as step foot inside the school. It's what I did during a recent playthrough, getting just about everything that I could before I was able to use Miraidon, or have access to the day-night cycle, weather, etc., even if it was to a painstaking degree. Outside of that, the open world does not level scale with you as you go through the region. I understand that it would have been relatively difficult to do this for the wild Pokemon, but genuinely all you really need to do for the important fights is make variations of each boss fight depending on how many other things you've done during the campaign. Would this result in Katie having 18 different teams? Sure, but she would have at least been a challenge the entire time instead of just being the Teddy Ursa lady you can come back to at the end of a game where your Skeledirge is able to knock everything out with a singular sneeze. On the opposite side of a coin, for the first time since maybe Generation 5, I really need to give the story writers their dues here. The friend group you form with Penny, Arven, and Nimona genuinely feels like an actual friend group with how they come together and interact with each other at the start and end of a game, with little nuances given to the three of them and their surrounding cast members. Of course, I'd be a lot more invested if the game was voice acted, especially in this age. 2020s, but I'll give my 10s where 10s are due. It's definitely not the most replayable game just by virtue of it being an open world structure, but one where I at least get the hype. Just not one I recommend picking up if you're just looking for any Pokemon Switch title though. At least not when new Pokemon Snap is right there. As for its bracket results, honestly, these games had a relatively weak set of bracket matchups, easily cleaning up against Pokepark 1, Stadium 2, and Rumble Blast, before taking the big ol' 1-2 from XD and Explorers of Sky. Let's end this entry on a positive note though. What's one thing you would do to improve Scarlet and Violet? Let me know down in the comments. We're entering our top 10 now, and at number 10 is possibly the funniest game in the bracket, Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. Not for its writing or anything, but just the fact that it lost to the same game twice without being a finalist. It ended up being an absolute warrior in the losers bracket though, clearing through Gates to Infinity, Puzzle League, Dash, Gold and Silver, BDSP, and Stadium 2 in quick succession before getting dismantled by Emerald once more. At least it has the honor of being the first game we're discussing to win 6 matches though. With a relatively weaker set of matches, it does allow me to talk about the debate of Emerald versus Oraz, and why I'm on Team Emerald, much like the bracket results went. Emerald's storytelling element of simply having both teams present during the campaign and portraying both as holistically wrong was a nice touch. And Emerald, of course, went through the natural things the third version usually does, such as cleaning up unnecessary clunk, doing team redesigns, and providing more post-game challenges. Oraz also suffers from having the EXP all issue in combination with just handing out strong threats. During Emerald, you're only really given a Castform as a gift Pokemon without going out of your way, and as much as I can appreciate Castform's gimmick in the weather generation, there's no question that Castform is a terrible Pokemon on the battlefield. Oraz though, there's a Pikachu with a couple different unique moves for the little rodent depending on its cosplay costume, with the most notable probably being Draining Kiss with a Popstar Pikachu, or Icicle Crash with the Bell form. Oh, and also the 3 Latios or Latias the game just gives you right after you reach Route 118 for reasons. Latias and especially Latios have been incredibly powerful Pokemon throughout the history of the series, with Latios in particular still being as high as the underused tier on Smogon all the way in Generation 9. While the Pokemon are definitely better with their signature Soul Dew item, getting Mega Evolutions of these powerful dragons is also an incredibly huge spike to your power as well. The Generation 3 games were never really hard to begin with outside of a Battle Frontier and Emerald, something this game also lacks and very slightly mocks with its little small-scale model on a small island. So getting a Mega Evolution that's that powerful halfway into the game is nothing short of game-breaking. The Delta episode is a nice little epilogue though. I'll always take more time exploring the beefs Rayquaza finds itself in. Coming in at 9th and the second highest game by voting percentage is a game I don't think anyone anticipated being this early, Black and White 2. Its bracket was relatively easy though, I'll give it that, just having to deal with the likes of Picross, Go, and BDSP before its 1-2 KO. That 1-2 KO though came in the form of a 6-vote poll against Platinum and a close matchup with 16 votes cast with Pokemon Snap, a game that went on an incredibly weird and strong tear during the bracket. Speaking personally, I do generally prefer Black and White 1 for committing to the soft reset approach the generation started with, as well as all things N. But there's definitely quite a bit to like to Black and White 2, from the Pokemon World Tournament to all the different locales you now get to explore, as you now have to stop a now fractured Team Plasma, with one side headed up by an even more bloodthirsty Getsis. The Pokemon World Tournament in particular feels like a last hurrah of sorts for the first era of the Pokemon games as they were, since Black and White 2 were the last sprite-based titles, and here's this area with a bunch of gym leaders hopping into a regional battle dome to show you all sorts of different teams. The kicker for me though is the Unova link, where you can see a whole bunch of special cutscenes that fill in the gaps for specific gym leaders and characters, since Black and White 2 happened 2 years after the original titles, among other features. Crazily enough, it's also the only mainline Pokemon title to have difficulty options. Given you need to finish a game before you can access said difficulty options, unless you link up with another copy of Black and White 2, but hey, the option exists! The Generation 5 games in general are a huge highlight for the series, even if I personally prefer Generation 4, enough to where I can acknowledge that Black and White 2 got a bit shafted here. Moving into our round 8 losers. In 8th place, we have possibly the game that earned the Zombie Award for lasting the longest after its initial loss, Guardian Signs. Being the first game to win 7 matches after getting knocked down by Arceus, Guardian Signs was able to knock out Channel, Dreamworld, Unite, Red and Blue Rescue Team, Rumble Blast, Go, and XY before finally succumbing to Pokemon Snap. It should also be worth noting that those last 4 wins were all by a singular vote, so literally it just kept escaping an early exit. As much as I glazed Shadow's Valmia earlier, Guardian Signs is a very solid Ranger title that could very well be argued as the best in the series for 2 reasons, and 2 reasons alone. First things first, Ukulele Pichu, an incredibly powerful partner the longer you go through the game that requires no skill to actually use, with a sweet little tune every time you do send the little rodent onto the field. Little mouse dude shreds, what can I say? There's also the fact that there's a whole multiplayer campaign you can do solo if you really want to, all revolving around stopping a powerful group of steelheads in the past. A much harder campaign than the main story due to everything being a time trial. With a pretty generous amount of post-game allotted as a result, next to the Saturday morning cartoon antics of our bad guys this time, the Pokemon Pinchers, there's a lot to like in this entry that I'm only really scratching the surface of here. It's a shame we never got another title after this one, especially on the 3DS, but hey, it is what it is. We still have a trio of games to play with. In 7th is my personal favorite Pokemon game, Explorers of Sky. Since we're going to be spending quite a bit of time dissecting this one and going over what I was hinting at in the Time and Darkness section, let's just start off with the bracket results really quick. Cool. Explorers of Sky picked up a total 6 wins. Stadium won in a close vote, Detective Pikachu returns in a blowout, Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, Rescue Team DX in a 5-vote matchup, Conquest, and Scarlet and Violet by a singular vote. The games that knocked out, just Heart Gold, Soul Silver, and Emerald, which given their mainline status, I find incredibly fair. Okay, now time to glaze this thing up. Oh my god, this thing is so good. First of all, the soundtrack for this game, I'll go out and say it, the best in the franchise. I don't care. From the opening theme to Treasure Town to Temporal Tower to Dialga's fight to the finish to In the Morning Sun to Team Charm's theme to the Spin a Cafe song to Ant Plains to Dusk Forest to Hidden Land, there's just so many gems in this thing, all distinct from each other, yet all calling upon specific emotions through the wonderful use of leitmotifs. There's an awesome video by 8-Bit Music Theory going over that exact concept, by the way. Highly recommend a watch. Without hyperbole, Explorers of Sky has the characterization I wish the mainline titles had, and arguably has only really gotten close to with the Generation 5 and 9 titles. Your fellow Wigglytuff's guild members, all 12 of them, including Shoutout and Wigglytuff, all contribute their own unique personalities and charm to the plot in one way or another, to the point where all of them except maybe Dugtrio stick out in your head wonderfully in reflection. From Loudred being a hard ass to Sunflora's never-ending positivity, to Bidoof's aw shucks, to Decorfish's use of hey hey hey, the world that you're living in on this adventure feels more alive than Red and Blue Rescue Team by a fair margin. The main thing going on in the story here is a search of truth for who you really are, why you lost your memories, what the relic fragment discussed at the start of the game is actually for, if anything at all, and many more aspects along the way interwoven with Raven-Symoné type visions that allow you to become a top-rate explorer. I'd say the exploration aspect also feels the most natural here, with Pokemon broken up into IQ groups so that they can all bring something unique to the table as you balance out your items and try to make it to the end of some incredibly rough dungeons, such as Dark Crater, where you're running it as an escort mission with Cresselia, or the Zero Isle dungeons. Further aiding with characterization are the special episodes, campaigns which explore the happenings of Bidoof, Igglybuff, who we now know as Wigglytuff, Sunflora, Team Charm, and the future Pokemon. Some of these, like Sunflora's, could have been touched up a little bit more, but Igglybuff's and especially the future Pokemon special episodes are wonderfully heartfelt when they need to be, tugging at the heartstrings in a way the mainlines fail to most of the time. The post-game also lasts for quite a while too, giving you plenty of reasons to come back between the Darkrai and Manaphy plotlines on top of all the legendary hunting. For Manaphy, by the way, make sure to save your blue gummies specifically. You'll thank me later. Everything on offer here wraps itself with a glistening bow that draws me back time and time again, year after year. Looking forward to the dungeon crawl every time, trying out new combinations to try to seize the day, complete with an extraordinary OST that keeps the flow going. I honestly can't think of too many knocks against this game. It's my personal favorite, only knocked out by Titans in the mainline department. I'd love to talk about this game in much more depth, but that's more in line for a full game review, not quite this video. But hey, if y'all want that, I'd be happy to do it, just tell me. Now our round 9 losers, the last set before our final 4. Coming in at 6th is XD, aka the Big Shadow Lugia game. Is it bad I actually don't have too many thoughts about this one that are distinct from my thoughts about Colosseum? I guess the biggest thing would be that it feels slightly more child-friendly, thanks to the Jovi of it all and the fact that we're starting with a low-leveled Eevee instead of 2 Eeveelutions in their 20s. The end fight, though, with the box art Shadow Lugia, insanely tough, and I love it for that. The Purification Chamber song is also a bop and a half, but I think that goes without saying once you hear it the first time. I don't know. Like, I really do enjoy this one, I just can't think of much to say here, if that makes sense. As far as bracket performance goes, XD was the last spin-off game in the upper half of the bracket, taking down Rumble World, Art Academy, Gold and Silver, Super Mystery Dungeon, and Scarlet and Violet before getting squished by Black and White, and just barely missing the top 4 to Pokemon Snap. A pretty respectable run, coming up just shy of the main podium positions. In 5th, we have Emerald, the tried and true staple of the Generation 3 games. Since I've talked about Ruby and Sapphire as well as Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire already, allow me to talk bracket before we go into the mastery that is the Battle Frontier. Outside of taking out Auraz twice, Emerald's other wins during the bracket came against TCG1, Colosseum, Fire Red and Leaf Green, and Explorers of Sky. Stopping the game in its tracks was a combination of Black and White and Platinum. Definitely games that have an argument to be the best in the series depending on who you're asking. Now, Battle Frontier time so I can set up the glaze for my Queen Dahlia later. Something that you can feel in all the games with battle towers or their equivalents, or less than that, looking at you Scarlet and Violet, is that outside of just doing more battles to get a streak, there's not really much in the way of post-champion battle challenge, save for treating the league like a no-limit credit card. You'll also likely feel the monotony of battles after a while, especially if you played these games back to back like I did for that old recording session I've alluded to a few times. The Battle Frontier masterfully solves both of these issues, putting various twists on the same old, asking you to team build in such a way where you're able to withstand each facility's unique climate. In Hoenn, you get 7 of these facilities, which I'll be covering from closest to the norm to the furthest. Up first, the Battle Tower. Really, no twist at all, but hey, if you want to see Annabelle before she was an Alola, here you go. Then there's the Battle Dome, headed up by Tucker, where you're winning consecutive tournaments on your quest to get the gold symbols. Very cool. Very epic. I'd probably put the Battle Arena next in this list, where your Pokemon are locked in once a matchup begins, and your goal is to either knock out the opposing Pokemon within 3 turns, or win in a scoring matchup, where you're rated based on how much HP your Pokemon has left, if you launched an offensive, and if you landed attacks successfully. Then there's the Battle Factory, a very cool facility where you don't actually use your own Pokemon, but instead choosing from a set of rentals that get progressively more competent the longer your streak is, with the option to switch out for stronger and stronger Pokemon as you progress. Fifth in line, I'd place the Battle Palace, our last simple string of battles where you don't actually control anything, rather there's a whole bunch of calculations that are happening to figure out what's going to go down each turn based on the nature of each Pokemon, as well as the amount of HP they have left. Very intriguing facility. One I don't understand worth crap off a cuff, but hey, it's fun. For someone. Second to last is the Battle Pike, an easy facility where you're reading hints given to you by an NPC to try to make it through a series of rooms in one piece. Finally, the Battle Pyramid, which plays closer to a low visibility dungeon and mystery dungeon where you're trying to ascend 7 floors, with each pass-through having a unique obstacle, such as Pokemon specializing in paralysis or draining PP. Given RNG is done slightly different here too, and how long of a streak you need to accumulate in some of these facilities, there's definitely a lot to come back to with Emerald just for this area alone. There's also Trainer Hill, something we lightly touched on in the Fire Red Leaf Green section that honestly would have been cool as a facility instead of the likes of a tower, where you need to get to the end of the area by a certain amount of time before you lose. Just saying. Finally, the cutscene of Emerald coming down and yelling at its neighbors to shut up and go to bed. Perfect. No notes. Thank you, Rayquaza, for allowing us to see your beefs once more. And in the top 4 we go, and our final spin-off comes in at 4th place. I've mentioned Pokemon Snap's name plenty during the script, but once more, let's just go over its matchup history, where it was able to take down Puzzle League, TCG Live, Crystal, Fire Red Leaf Green, Arceus, Black and White 2, Guardian Signs, and XD, before finally succumbing to Platinum while also being knocked down by Conquest earlier on. That's 8 different games it beat, by the way, being the game with the most overall victories throughout the tournament. That said, a number of those were close calls, winning over Fire Red Leaf Green, Arceus, and XD only by a singular vote each, which leads to a relatively low voting percentage for this lane of a bracket, being eclipsed by the likes of XD and Shadows of Almia. Now, as to why this game is so beloved? Outside of the N64 titles in general all being pretty well liked outside of Hey You Pikachu, Pokemon Snap was the second spin-off in the entire franchise, only being preceded by, of course, Hey You Pikachu. Pokemon Snap also opts for a much more calm energy than the mainline titles, opting to hone in on the nature observation aspect that these games can shine in if put behind the right lens, by allowing the player to become a wildlife photographer, seeing Pokemon in their natural habitat and taking their best pictures to send into National Geographic. There's also the interactivity some of these areas in Pokemon provide, giving way for light puzzle-solving elements. Easy example? At the end of a tunnel section you can find a couple Magnemite. If you just try to take a picture of them, however, they'll create some interference to the point where you can't really take a picture. To solve this quandary, even if it opens up the much bigger issue of how the hell do Magnemite eat, you throw some apples. In that same area is a blocked off path, but if you blow up some Electro nearby, you'll be able to explore a volcano. Part nature safari, part puzzle solving extravaganza, all while trying to be the best photographer possible and impress Professor Oak along the way. I said it earlier, I did not grow up with a Nintendo 64. I actually have a bit of a weird history of Nintendo, getting started with a GBA, but mostly with Game Boy Color cartridges, and not getting a home console until the Wii. That said, when I went to go do all those recordings for that retrospective I need to do one day, I instantly understood the appeal of Pokemon Snap, and why a follow-up was requested for so long. It's not my favorite spin-off, but I absolutely understand the hype, and why I was able to mosey on up to 4th place. In third, and my favorite mainline most days, Pokemon Platinum. I feel like it's prudent here to start with just how much of a glow-up this game was as opposed to Diamond and Pearl, and the strongest case of a third version. Among other things, the Pokedex is expanded, including allowing for a few more fire types in the cold region, as noted by the snow just lingering in a number of towns, graphical updates across the board, much wider use of the Sinnoh-exclusive Pokeball Seal function, an expanded glimpse into Cyrus and Team Galactic as a whole, much faster surfing speeds which help out greatly on the trek from Sunny Shore to Victory Road, both gym leader and rivalry matches, all things Looker, an expanded selection of Pokemon for Amity Square, which could be seen as a precursor for Heart Gold and Soul Silver's following Pokemon system, and of course, the inclusion of a new battle frontier, among many, many other things. In short, Sinnoh exactly the way it should have been from the jump, done in such a way that releasing one pair of games plus DLC is simply not capable of. There's also something to be said about every third version making the upper half, I think, and 2 of them making the top 8s. Also, again, the Battle Frontier, with mostly new facilities versus Emerald. The Battle Tower and Battle Factory return once more, but are joined by 3 new facilities this time. The Battle Hall, where you take a Pokemon and try to have them defeat 10 Pokemon of every type with increasing difficulty. The Battle Castle, where you earn points based on how well you do and how challenging you made the fight, using those points to either heal your Pokemon, buy items, or skip fights altogether. And in what I'd argue is the cream of the crop, the Battle Arcade, headed up by the Queen Dahlia with a bitchin' facility theme in tow, where you spin a roulette to determine the random conditions for that battle. Especially when the roulette starts to get faster with every streak of 7 you finish, with better and better randomized conditions that could blow back against you, the stakes intensity just rise, with it making for an incredibly fun time. I will miss the facilities that had you explore first instead of battle, but I think the set of 5 is incredibly solid as well. Save for the Battle Hall, that could have stayed on the drawing board in favor of a puzzle-solving area. When people wanted a quote-unquote faithful remake of the Generation 4 titles, they were really talking about Platinum, and all the improvements it brought to the table, including a goddamn button to go back if you accidentally skipped an app on the Pokétch. Not the relative mess that was Diamond and Pearl. Bracket-wise, Platinum had a relatively easy time, I'd say, taking out TCG Online, Unite, Yellow, Black and White 2, Emerald, and Pokemon Snap, only losing to each of our 2 finalists in Heart Gold and Soul Silver and Black and White 1. Funny thing about our top 3 games, the maximum number of votes that all 3 games could have received from their matches was the exact same number, 89. Platinum received 62 votes throughout the whole tournament, second place 61, and first 66. Between the 3, it really could have gone any which way here. In second place, drumroll please, it's Black and White 1. Far and away from the main lines, the best storytelling we've seen thanks to N's complicated character, while Team Plasma asks a tough question about the will of a Pokemon, before treating them like crap, but hey! Point stands. Major props for pissing off PETA with this title as well, by the way. They've allegedly done some really shady shit behind the scenes, so hey, little poking at them, I'm happy. You're in my good graces. On Black and White 1's road to second place, it beat Channel, Red and Blue, Mystery Dungeon Time and Darkness, Emerald, XD, and Platinum. The only game it lost to? Heart Gold and Soul Silver. Twice. I will also applaud the large swing that the developers took with this title, going for a soft reset after 4 straight generations where you were able to explore Kanto in some capacity. It was bold, and it most definitely paid off, especially in the storytelling department. Between the interconnectivity of the gym leaders, complete with each of them having some sort of job, to your 2 rivals having dreams outside of just being the best like no one ever was, whatever that really means, there's actual character motivations running rampant throughout the whole thing, resulting in a wonderful climax of a plot, which ends in the only time where the credits roll not after you defeat the champion, but after you defeat the big bad of the plot who's taken over the Pokemon League's facility. A perfect peak to the stakes, mixed with a perfect conclusion. It really is a shame that the storytelling department backed down so hard after the Generation 5 titles, especially in Generation 6, outside of AZ, who came in way too late. Game Freak can actually put the RP in RPG when they actually try. The soundtrack is also phenomenal, with very obvious bops in Accumula Town and Driftvale City, just to name a couple. I don't want to go too in-depth here, but Black and White is definitely deserving of being called one of the best Pokemon games in series history. By process of elimination and clutching up in both the bracket and voting percentage results, the winner of this tournament was Heart Gold and Soul Silver. Compared to Black and White 1, it's pretty easy to see that Heart Gold and Soul Silver had an even tougher road to the end. Outside of taking out Black and White 1 twice, Heart Gold and Soul Silver took wins against Sun and Moon, Legends Arceus, which was an incredibly large and funny 16-1 swing, Explorers of Sky, X and Y, and Platinum. 3 mainline titles, 4 if you take Game Freak's word for it, and one of the most beloved spin-offs, all of which were taken out with relative ease. Outside of being a remake of Gold and Silver in the 4th generation, complete with a serene soundtrack and fully fleshed out version of Kanto now that we're on the DS, now the Game Boy Color, Heart Gold and Soul Silver does quite a number of things right and unique. The Pokewalker is probably my favorite of the bunch, being an incredibly accurate pedometer at the time per an Iowa State University study, and allowing you an alternative way to get some Pokemon early, such as Murkrow and Elekid. The Safari Zone, something that wasn't even in the original Generation 2 titles, makes a big return here, being customizable and rewarding long playtimes with more Pokemon becoming available the longer a biome is kept up. The longest waits being 100 days for Gible in the Rocky Beach biome and 110 days for Bronzong and Bagon in the forest and swamp biomes respectively. Quite a while? Absolutely. But if you need to go on Big Brother 27 and you want to come back to use a Sheldon or Gabite on your way to take on the Johto Elite Four, you can absolutely do so. Also on the docket, the Pokeathlon, an alternative to contests where Pokemon compete in athletic minigames to try to earn the highest score as a team of 3, the Crystal plotline being worked into the main campaign, gym leader rematches, event Pokemon that unlock exclusive areas including the Sinjoh Ruins where Cynthia just casually gets to flex that she is indeed Cynthia from Pokemon and is just that bitch, the Battle Frontier from Sinnoh just casually being ported over after you beat the League the first time so that Queen Dahlia can shine once more, and following Pokemon done exactly right, at the exact same speed as protagonist, no matter the species, so it doesn't look fucking weird. Honestly, the only thing the remakes really missed was the opportunity to fix Johto's level curve problem. But by that same token, I think the level curve issue is part of Johto's charm. Johto as a whole is a laid-back region, far more traditional than Kanto, and is mostly just looking to coexist with their Pokemon, as opposed to every 10-year-old trying to be the world's best trainer. Do the citizens of Johto battle? Yeah, of course. But for the most part, it comes across as those trainers just doing battle for fun alongside their companions, not necessarily trying to become a stronger trainer. Well, unless your name is Youngster Joey or Claire anyway. It's only once you start moving closer to Kanto, the much more battle-heavy region and the one that has a gym leader who is in a war that we all really should learn more about immediately, that the levels begin rising more and more. I'd argue that Spike is supposed to be rough. That era kid coming from an incredibly small town that didn't even know Kanto was in his backyard, moving up the ranks in a region that doesn't value battling as much as it values companionship. Yes, it could be better for gameplay's sake, but I'd also argue that such arguments come at the misunderstanding or reduction of what Johto really is. When a game's only real issue is if it should have kept a traditional area's traditional roots, you know you have a winner on your hands. It's probably why Heart Gold and Soul Silver cleaned house so easily in this tournament, and would probably continue to do so if I ran this whole thing again. And with that, that's all 75 games that were included in my 3-month-long bracket discussed, going from August to November 2024. Of course, you guys saw a couple different stats on the screen, so I'd be remiss to just let all that data go to waste. So let's get into those additional stats like it's the end of a Mario Party game. First things first, the average for all of the games. Adding every percentage together and dividing by the number of games gives us an average percentage of 42.58%. This places a total of 39 games above the line and 36 below, really showing some of the faults of our early KOs, but hey, Stadium 1 was knocked out right away and it made it above the line, so that's something. In this second graph here, I took the games and separated them out by generations, averaged up the games in each generation, then found the overall generational average, which ended up being 42.9%. Here we can see Generation 1 really dropped the ball, with Generation 5 not too far behind. But I would contribute those two to having a couple stinkers like Hey You Pikachu and Dream World. I'd also put an asterisk on Generation 9, as only 3 games from Generation were included in this bracket. Most of the generations are above the average line though, so that's good. In graph number 3, the games by console. Since some of these were multi-platform, I'll touch on where I included some of these just really quick. Mystery Dungeon, Red and Blue Rescue Team were simultaneously released on GBA and DS, and actually have some quirky interconnectivity with dual slot mode. That title I included with the DS category. There were also a couple games put out for both the Switch eShop and mobile devices that I opted to count in with the Switch numbers: Quest, Cafe Remix, and Unite. After finding the average for each console, the overall average, after putting all those together, was 39.46%. Naturally, the consoles that did not see much of a Pokemon presence scored on the lower end, especially the Wii U, since Pokémon Tournament DX is a Switch game as opposed to the original version being on Wii U. The GBA and DS came out of that incredibly strong, with only a few duds mixed in there, meaning you have a pretty safe era where you can make recommendations from for people to have a pretty good time. In graph number 4 here, I decided to break down the rounds by the first 9, where multiple eliminations happen, followed by the final 4, then find out the overall averages for each group. Naturally, we see a climb here with an incredibly strong round 4 and 7, before the results begin to dip and waver a bit. Round 1 and 2 not seeing much of a difference doesn't really shock me, given the quote-unquote lesser titles that fell out that early, but hey, just something fun to look at. Last but not least, spin-offs versus mainlines. Which is better? To reiterate from the Arceus section, given it operates completely different from the likes of Platinum or Sun and Moon or Scarlet and Violet, I opted to put Arceus in the spin-off section regardless of what Game Freak is trying to tell me. All the same though, to no one's surprise, the mainlines walked away as the winner by just over a 20-point percentage difference. Channel was the weakest performing spin-off at a mere 3.85%, while BDSP was the weakest mainline to no one's surprise, clocking in at 31.91%. When you put it like that, no duh. But also some of the spin-offs get incredible praise. So I figure look at things as a whole, see what we could see. And with that, that is a full, complete breakdown of the 75-game Pokemon tournament that I ran on my community polls, with the results being used to dictate Volume 2 of the Ultimate Pokemon Playlist. Volume 1 is actually in development as of finishing the script, with Volume 2 pretty much finalized and ready to go. If you enjoyed all of the analysis complete with my thoughts on each game, please do me a favor and leave a like, leave a comment, and subscribe. All 3 of these actions help out plenty with the algorithm side of things, and I'd love to grow just by doing my own little thing over here. Also, I mentioned it a couple times. If you guys want me to talk about any specific game mentioned in here or not mentioned, let me know in the comments as well. In the description, you'll also find my Discord, my all-new Blue Sky, my Patreon, and a lot more. So please, check all that out. Next time you hear me talking, it's most likely going to be with the breakdown of a Fire Emblem bracket that we ran before this. So if that strikes your fancy, stick around. Next bracket is probably running right now, actually. This time for the Persona games. I might do the Persona characters afterwards, to be honest. We'll see. Until then, my name is Joey Pals. Thank you all one and all for watching. Stay healthy and stay safe. I'm signing off and getting myself a lozenge, dear God. Take care. Bye.